Thank you, everybody, for being here with us for strategic story number 2. And we're going to delve into the advocate story map today. And this is really exciting because this is the nuts and bolts. This is when you start to pull apart stories and put them back together and really make them compelling. So, as I start today, because we're recording it, we will share the recording with you. So, I want to make sure everybody has paper and a pencil or a pen to write stuff down because it's going to be about your story. So, don't worry about scrambling to write down everything we say today. We're going to share a handout with you tomorrow that's going to have everything in it. Today, your notes are specifically for your own story. And I also want to let you know that we will answer questions, but at the end. However, as you think of them, please write them down and please put them in the text box so we don't forget to address them because this is all about you and getting to your next level of storytelling. Really quickly, because I shared our bios in the email newsletter right before this, I'm Melissa Balmer, the founder. I'm here with my dear friend and colleague, Jim Brown. He's going to wave at you. And you're going to learn more about us through what we share today. But really, this is about you. Trini Willerton is with us, our very wonderful sponsor, and she's going to give us an update at the very end about the exciting things she's been doing with storytelling and her visit to Washington, D.C. So if you haven't done so already, please take a minute to go ahead and share your name, your location, and if you're affiliated with an organization and you feel comfortable sharing that, share that because we are building a team, a squad of storytellers for advocacy or advocate storytellers that really want to improve their skills. So you might connect with somebody today that you want to continue a relationship with. And we want to thank you because this is tough work. To be an advocate to create safer streets isn't easy. You might be the victim of traffic violence yourself. And so we want to touch on our agreements for this because Jim and I are not mental health professionals. We are storytelling coaches, we're media relations coaches. So we ask you that today we're not going to delve into the particulars of any traffic violence that anybody has had in their life because we don't want to trigger you and we don't want to trigger others. And because today is about the nuts and bolts of storytelling. So I'm asking that you start on a story today. But if your story that you want to tell is still really tough for you, I'd like you to think of a different story to play with today. Okay. So because we want you to really feel the tools rather than getting upset about a really horrible thing that happened to you. Because our goal today is to help you craft a 5-minute and less story for your advocacy work. And we want you to get to the next level. What we're going to cover today specifically is my storytelling map, the advocate's storytelling map. And we're going to have you start mapping out your story step by step. Then Jim is going to tell a wonderful sample story, and he's going to break down why it works using the advocate story map. And then we're going to answer your questions, and we are going to ask you to share from what you take notes about today. So again, this is about you and getting you to the next level of storytelling. So I want to review, because we have a few new people with us today, that stories work because they open our hearts and change minds and motivate people to action in ways that data alone can't. So you need your data, but you need to wrap your data in stories in order to be really effective. This is from Dr. Pam Rutledge, a media psychologist, and she's talking about how stories use metaphors and archetypes and they help us with empathy to create empathy for shared experience. So storytelling is really all about the science. So science has now figured out that when stories are shaped in compelling and affecting ways, the ancient art of storytelling, they actually click in and they release hormones and neurotransmitters that make us focus our attention span. They make us remember things better. And so that's how they change your brain chemistry, they breed compassion, and they motivate people to action. So that's really key for us. This is why we're all about storytelling. So if you will, I'd like you to write down right now what you want your story to be today. What story are you going to be writing about? And if you feel up for it, text it, because again, we want to excuse me, we want to create that connection for you with other people. So what do you want your story to focus on today? What's the story that you brought with you? And as you think about that, I want to review a little bit again about what we're going to cover. So last time in our storytelling class, which is online, our strategic storytelling class number 1, and I will share that with you in the email that I follow up after this class, it was about setting your intention for the story. Part 2 is what we're doing today. We're talking about story structure. And then part 3, in about a month, we're going to talk about the details and the approach that really polish your story. So let's think about today, what is your purpose for telling the story? So set your intention, write that down, and that's going to set us up to go on this journey. So what we're going to learn today is a simplified hero's journey story. And the hero's journey story was discovered by Professor Joseph Campbell in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And the reason why we know about it today, when he wrote it over, I think, 50 years ago, is that George Lucas used it as the template for the Star Wars movies when he ran into some trouble with the stories. And so Hollywood uses the hero's journey today. Many books follow the hero's journey, but it has 17 steps and magical intervention, which most of us don't have access to today. So I have simplified it to make an advocate story map that I think works for our purposes. The thing to remember about an advocate's story, an advocate's hero story is not that it's about winning, because it's not. It's about transformation. And that's who we are and what we want to do. We are transformers. So we get in a lot of battles that we don't necessarily win, but we still move the needle where we want it to go, right? And so that's something you want to, if you say, well, I'm not a hero, or the person I'm writing about isn't a hero, that's not the way to think of it. You are somebody helping to transform streets. So that's what you want to keep in mind. And when you're going to do a story that needs to be very short, so this is 5 minutes or less, and if you're giving testimony at a city council, it has to be even shorter than that. It might be 2 or 3 minutes. You want to zoom in. So instead of doing this big, wide epic about the whole history of you as an advocate today, think about maybe one section of the story. So what happened over like a very short amount of time that you could zoom in on so that you can really get into some interesting details. And now we're going to go into the 8 steps of the story. You don't have to scribble these down, because we're going to go through it step by step. And each one of these, I'm going to have you write down 1 or 2 sentences for the story. So you might have thought, oh, my story can't map to this. This doesn't work. This isn't real life. Right, real life happens, but then you take an idea for a story and you use these puzzle pieces and you map to this, and suddenly it's in the shape that the human brain finds more interesting, compelling, and easy to remember. So we will find ways to fit our stories into this structure. So to start off, the number one thing you want to do in a story when you start, after you say, let me tell you the story, is you want to set the scene. So where were you? I'm going to use a very silly pretend, not silly, but a very loose pretend story that I live in a neighborhood where I've realized it's dangerous for children to cross a particular street in order to go to school. So maybe you live in a beautiful historic neighborhood, or maybe you live in the suburbs, or maybe you live in an urban core. Wherever it is that you live, let's say you want to create safer streets. You want to set the scene. So just like a great movie or a great book, boom, like in the first couple seconds, the first sentence or two, it was a dark and stormy night. So right now, in a minute and a half, I want you to think of a dark and stormy night sentence that's about your story. So just write down really quickly something pithy and short that starts your story off. What's your dark and stormy night sentence or two?
Melissa, does it have to be dark or could it be, I mean,
No, it's
say
whatever.
like,
I just used dark and stormy night because it was a funny, everybody knows that one in English. Trini, my bad. I'm sure in Spanish there's another more beautiful sentence. But no, this is your This is your sizzling, like little bits of information, descriptive
Okay.
information about the fall leaves,
Yeah.
the wet pavement, you know, whatever it is that you want it to be. But think descriptive detail because that's what really draws people in. That's what people think of your senses. What were you smelling, tasting, touching, feeling? Was it hotter than heck? Were you dripping sweat? Were you nervous, frightened, whatever it is? Just write a couple of sentences about that. And so we just have about a little bit less than 30 seconds to go. So wrap that up. Okay, now we're going to go to the next step, and this is called the inciting incident or let's see, I'm blanking on the inciting incident or rising action. So in my little story, I've realized that it's dangerous for children to cross the street. And wouldn't you know, a small child was hurt crossing this very busy, scary street. So my inciting incident is that I've been thinking about it and then a child got hurt. So for your story, what happened to start you off on your journey or the person you're writing about? And on the journey, it's probably wanting to solve a problem of a dangerous street, right? And so you want to figure out what that is for you. So now we're going to take, again, just a little, we're going to go and take a minute and a half to write down what the rising action or inciting incident is that kicked this story into gear for you. It might be something you were thinking about for a long time, and this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Or it might be something that just, boom, happened out of nowhere, and all of a sudden you found yourself interested in solving this problem. So this is a classic in every story. Something happens that kicks things into a higher gear. This is where people start to focus their adrenaline and cortisol, the stress hormones that super focus the attention span of people and make them want to hear what happens next. So we just have 30 seconds left to finish up. What happened to kick it into high gear? Bonus points if you can have some descriptive details. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the next step. And the next step in this story is, did you meet a mentor? Now, I like to use this very loosely as in regards to a mentor. And I also want to let you know that this might happen later in the story. It doesn't have to happen here, but it's always good to share. Was there somebody who helped you? Was there somebody who helped you realize things that you didn't know, things you didn't understand, and um, got you to the next level? So in my case, I'm going to pretend that I met the staff at a city council, and they told me, okay, well, you should come to a city council feedback and talk about this issue. So that's one person that helped me out. And then later, I'm going to meet an advocate a professional advocate who's going to help me along and learn the ropes. So who did you meet on your journey? Now, it might be a book you read. It might be a documentary that you saw. It might be a TED Talk. It might be a person at your parent-teacher association. So was there somebody that actually helped you learn what you needed to know to get to your next place about being a problem solver for advocacy? So we're going to take another minute and a half to go ahead and think about that. And sometimes that doesn't come to you right away. It's hard to remember if somebody did that for you, but it really is if you can share that with people, you recognize that we need to create community and learn from each other. So, who was that person for you? Or more than one person. And in one story that I share about giving up my car and how I fell into active and safe street advocacy backwards, was that my mentor was actually the city of Long Beach. I gave up my car because I knew they had good public transit. So it might be a very loose idea of what a mentor is, but it was something, some idea, some person, some concept that helped you realize that you could go on this journey and do what you needed to do. So we have a little bit less than 30 seconds left. You can wrap that up. Okay, and the next step, this is the story's climax. So the climax of the story is not where you win. The climax of the story is the height of the action. So the climax of the story is that you meet allies and enemies. You're really tested. So in my little story of wanting to create a safer intersection, I go to the city council meeting and I put my problem in front of them. And instead of everybody saying, oh, of course we want safe streets for children, that sounds like a wonderful thing to put in a light at that intersection, I get a lot of pushback. And I'm horrified that I don't have people on my side. But remember, I told you that at this meeting, I also meet a professional advocate and they take me under their wing and they teach me what I need to learn about how you actually get things changed in a city, which I'm sure a lot of you are learning about now if you haven't already. So I want you to take a minute and a half right now, and I want you to write about the climax of your story. Remember, this isn't about winning. This is about some like height of like big thing where you were tested and you had to learn how to handle yourself. You might have realized who you have to win over, and you didn't realize you had so many people that you had to make better allies. You might have realized who really are your enemies, and you just need to avoid them, or you need to find a way to move around them as much as possible. So, what's the story's climax? And you're going to have time to work on the story to add details. So don't worry too much that you're getting anything perfect right now. This is just kind of learning how the pieces go together so that you can learn how to craft your stories and you can help others that you work with craft their stories. So again, this is about the structure. This is the structure the human brain likes the most of all time throughout history. And once you have it down, once you really know how to put this kind of story together, you can use it to map all kinds of stories. So we just have about 30 seconds left. What was the climax of your story? Okay, I went a little bit over on that one. Sorry about that. Now it's never smooth sailing after the climax. You have the falling action, and the falling action is there's more bumps on the road, right? And so in my case, let's say I went to the city council meeting, I got shot down, the advocate helped me learn what I have to learn, and then let's say that I meet with some city council people that I thought I could convince. And to convince them, there's a lot more work that has to be done. I need to learn more things about how city government works and how change actually happens. So what happened for you? Take the next minute and a half to write about what happened for you that you are learning all the roadblocks that you have to get around. And it's not fun. We don't like it, but every story has this. And this is what keeps people riveted. And this is what makes people feel like they can relate to you and that everybody has challenges they have to overcome. So what were the challenges that you had to overcome? And again, you didn't overcome everything. This might just be a bite-sized chew that you learned for this particular short story. This isn't everything you've learned as an advocate, but for this particular situation, what was it that you had to learn how to maneuver around? So there's just a little bit less than 30 seconds left for you for that. Okay. And now this is where we really get into the secret sauce. And this goes together with the following action. This is the hero's transformation. This is where you see the world anew because of what you've learned, and your audience gets to see the world anew because of it. So I was a naive person. I didn't even know who my city council people were. I never voted for them. All of a sudden, I want to make a street safer, and I'm learning about how change actually happens in a city. And I want to become good at it because then it occurs to me that I'm meeting all of these other people that really want safer streets for kids as well. And I learned that, wow, kids are getting harmed and killed on crosswalks all over the place. And this is really an issue that I'd never paid attention to before. But suddenly I'm a new parent and I care. So, what's your hero's transformation? We also call it the aha moment. And in this, you share your struggle and your overcoming. So, me, I might have like thought, oh, red tape, I don't want to deal with this. I'm an entrepreneur, city governments, oh my gosh. And then I realized, well, it's the only way I'm going to actually get anything done. I cannot go hire people to make this street and this intersection safe. And so, what is it that happened to you? Let's take a minute and a half where you had a struggle and overcoming, and your audience is going to see the world anew because of what you experienced. This is when this is what opens hearts and changes minds. This is where famous TV shows, Will and Grace, for example, used Debbie Reynolds as the grandmother who had a gay child and accepted the gay child. And this was the last big TV show that most of America watched that really changed a lot of people's minds. If Debbie Reynolds could accept a gay grandson, then they could too. So what happened to you that you are seeing the world anew? So let's just take another minute to write down, what was that? Could it be that you didn't realize streets were dangerous because you thought through the drivers, you mostly were in a car? Could be that you didn't understand how laws at your local level, city, state, whatever, national, were changed. What happened? About 30 more seconds. What was your aha moment, your hero's transformation, your struggle and overcoming? This is the secret. This is the superpower of storytelling, where they really help other people see the world through your eyes or who you're writing the story about and see the world anew. Okay. And then This is something that you don't have to do, but if you are already been at this for a while and you're an advocate and you want to take your storytelling to the next level, I highly recommend you take it on. And this is from the Solutions Journalism Network that trains journalists all over the world to do solutions journalism. And the reason that this is so important is that we live in a society now where news is fragmented and people are talking about challenges but not solutions. And people feel really frightened and fed up and wanting to ignore the news. So you know, as an advocate, or you're learning that you don't just bring your problems to the city council, you bring a viable solution, and that's how you start to really get stuff done. So what I want you to do is not take all of these sentences right now, but let's just pick one of them. So it's the whole acronym. So W is what is the response that it addresses? How does it work? O is what insights does it offer? L is the limitations, and E is what evidence does it provide? So just pick one of those if you happen to be somebody who has a solution you're bringing forward, and what does that address? So in my case, I want a light at an intersection, and I will, if I brought this forward, I will have done my homework and find out, well, yeah, actually, this street should have had a light put in years ago because it warrants enough traffic, and um, the speeds are way too high, and many other things. So just take one sentence right now for a minute and a half, and what does your solution, if you're going to do a solution, you don't have to, but if you want to raise your game as an advocate storyteller, what's the solution that you're bringing forward that you can weave into your story? So remember, in my case, I've done my homework and I've realized the city is already behind at putting a light at this intersection. In your case, it might be about speed. It might be about a protected bike lane. It might be about a speed camera. It might be many other things. But if you've been at this a while, it's great to put this in there. You don't have to, but if you can, it's great to bring a solution in your story. So just about 30 seconds left to go. Wrap up your solution. And again, remember, this will all be in the handout that we share with you tomorrow. So you don't have to be scribbling whole down if you don't want to. No worries. It's coming and it'll be there for you to use. I mean, again, the purpose of doing whole is that it really gives confidence to people that you know what you're talking about. It raises your game. Okay, so now we're going to go into the eighth and the final step, and that's you're going to wrap your story up. So all stories have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, or they are not a story, they're an anecdote. The human brain does not find them as interesting to listen to. And as an advocate, you want a resolution for now. So remember, this isn't about winning, this is about wrapping things up for now, and you want to have a call to action. So my resolution might be that I learn from my mentor and I learn from city staff when the next time is that I can best bring forward this idea to have this intersection changed. And this time I'm going to be prepared. I'm going to have done way more homework. So my call to action as an advocate is going to be very specific to getting that done, right? So as an advocate, you always want to end your stories with a call to action. And that goes with your purpose, right? So what do you want people to do because they hear this story? Do you want them to show up at that city council meeting? Do you want them to vote on something? Do you want them to donate? Do you want them to sign your email newsletter? You want something very specific that they will take a action because they saw you today. It could be buy your book. I mean, it could be all kinds of things. Whatever it is, you want to make sure that you don't leave people hanging. You leave them with something to do, and that makes them feel even more like they've accomplished something by taking the time to listen to your story. So we're going to take a minute and a half right now just to do that. So again, you might not have won what you wanted to win, but how can you wrap it up as a to resolve it for now? More to come, and what's your call to action? You just have about 30 more seconds. So what do you want people to do? And then if you've already written that down, what's the tiniest baby step thing they could do right then when they heard you? So is this collecting their email? Is this click and sign a petition? What's the small thing that they could do? Because that small step makes them feel like they accomplished even more. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to set your story aside. So what you have right now is the bare bones of a 5-minute short story. And you can go through and then fill out each one of those steps as a paragraph or two, and you'll find by reading it out that you actually have a compelling and engaging story starting. But let's get into this even deeper by having Jim actually tell a story. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can all see Jim. And I'm going to turn it over to you. And you're going to tell us a story, and then you're going to tell us how you put the story together. Take it away, Jim.
Thanks, Melissa. So it was the fall of 2012, and I found myself in limbo. I had been working as the full-time communications director for Cowbike for the past 5 years, but that prior summer there was a staff reorganization. My full-time position was turned into a part-time contractor position, which meant that I wasn't going to last very long. Fortunately, I'd picked up a little bit of consulting work with Sacramento Area Bicycle Advocates, which was the local organization. So I could kind of keep it going for a while I figured out what my next step was going to be. And then out of the blue, one of the board members for SABA, Sacramento Area Bicycle Advocates, called me to let me know that the executive director had given notice and would I consider stepping in as the interim executive director. That was a big opportunity for me, but I couldn't discuss it publicly for now because the announcement of her departure hadn't been made yet. So I had this big secret I was living with. And then right around about the same time, I was contacted by the local TEDx organization, talk about bicycling and community. Also very unexpected. TEDx, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is the local affiliate of the national TED Talk organization. And it turns out that only later did I realize or learn that the TEDx people in Sacramento had put a poll up on Facebook and asked people for suggestions of who would be worth inviting to give a talk about community. And my friend John, who owns a bike shop, had suggested me. I wasn't even aware of this survey, and he didn't let me know. But some other people kind of seconded that idea, and the next thing you know, I get this invitation. Now, I hadn't given a talk quite like this before, but it really sounded like a great opportunity, especially given this secret new job that I would be starting soon. I was definitely a fan of the performance of storytelling. I love the Moth program, for those of you who are familiar with that. and also for the previous several months, I'd been reflecting on what I thought bicycle advocacy was really about. I was pretty sure it wasn't just about the fact that bikes were cool, or that people who ride bikes are important as a group. Um, so this was really a chance for me to gather my thoughts over about what actually I thought bike advocacy was about. Um, so getting ready was really the biggest challenge, getting ready for this talk. I was assigned a coach, and as the first step, he asked me to write down my talk and send it to him so he could be sure that I was on the right track. Um, I knew I didn't have a polished college level lecture with slides, and that was my image of a TED talk. The best I was going to be able to do was share a handful of stories about my encounters with people that I hoped would illustrate my thesis that riding a bike helps us care about our communities. I wasn't confident that this was what he was looking for, but he got back to me and he had no changes. He didn't have anything to suggest, but he told me two things. One, the talk had minutes in it, and it couldn't be, and it absolutely couldn't go over 8 minutes. So 8 minutes was my target, and I could not use notes. I had to go up there and deliver it without notes. So, needless to say, the pressure was on. So the first step I took was to read the talk, the written version of the talk, and read it aloud repeatedly while I was timing myself, so I knew where I was over. And I was quite a bit over at the start. So I would edit my talk down, read it again, time myself, and keep editing until I more or less had it down to 8 minutes. And by this point, I was intimately familiar with every word in this document. So I pretty much had the thing memorized. And now my next step was to be absolutely sure that I could hit 8 minutes without fail under any conditions. I was going to be on a stage in front of a bunch of people and I could not seize up. So I also did not want this to sound like I was reading from a script. So I took a long walk. I'm a person who processes thoughts and figures out problems while taking walks in my neighborhood. And on this particular occasion, I decided I would not come home until I could deliver the talk at 8 minutes without fail. So I took my phone with me because I could time myself, and I put my earbuds in so that I could give my talk and not look like a crazy man who was walking around the streets talking to himself, but instead was having an important phone call. So I put my earbuds in and I walked and I walked and I walked and I circled my neighborhood over and over. And after about 8 or 9 times of giving the talk, remember this is an 8 minute talk, so I was out there for probably close to an hour and a half. I pretty much got the pacing just right. I could give the talk in 8 minutes consistently. I felt like I sounded like a human being and not a robot, and I was ready. And so the day of the program arrived, I show up. They put the mic on me. I had this great little headset that was pretty cool. Never worn one of those before. And then I was told that I was the last speaker on the program, and that felt like a ton of pressure. And so I stood watching the other presenters give their talks, and then I would give my talk. Um, I'm on a stage in an auditorium. There are blinding theatrical lights in my eyes. I can barely see the audience. And at my feet, uh, only visible to me is a countdown clock with big red numerals, and that was counting down from 8 minutes. And I absolutely couldn't look at that because I would completely freak out and get lost. But it turned out everything went really smoothly. I didn't forget anything. I felt like I sounded like myself. I didn't pause or hesitate or forget anything. It was a really good experience, actually. And it left me with a couple of these takeaways. First of all, giving this kind of talk is actually doable. I could figure out how to tell some stories in a fairly polished way. Um, I'm a self-critical person and was had a lot of doubt about whether I had something of value to offer. But when I finally found the video of my talk on YouTube a year later, a friend of mine actually found it and sent me the link. I was really pleased to see how I delivered my talk. I actually did a pretty good job. The second takeaway I came from the experience was that uh, the fact that I was last in the program and that my handful of stories, which were so different from the PowerPoint presentations by the other presenters, the organizer's choice to end the program. And that showed me that stories are fundamentally different from a polished PowerPoint presentation and an important way to land something. They put me at the end, I think, because there was an emotional core to what I was sharing that the other stories didn't quite have. They were great talks, but they weren't kind of uh, talking about human experiences the way mine was. Um, Now, looking back on all of this, the experience made clear to me that all stories have a purpose, which is to touch people. And this is something that Melissa's talked about. And then much later, through knowing and working with Melissa, I started to learn about how stories affect brain chemistry and affect attention and motivation on the part of the listener. And that I really came to understand that storytelling is this superpower for advocates for cutting through the data and the abstractions and to actually make a human connection with an audience. Again, that's a point that Melissa has just made. And with that, I think Melissa and I want to go through
Yeah, let's go through let me share the screen again.
the
And
steps of my story.
yeah, here we go. Sorry about that. So we're going to go back. Sorry, guys. There we go. Oops. Come back, come back, come back. Sorry. There you go. Okay.
So in organizing my story, the setting was that situation in the fall when I was in limbo. I was transitioning out of a job at CalBike. I was transitioning into a job at Saba, but I didn't have the job yet. And that was really the setting because the next thing that happened was this invitation to give this talk. And to me, that's the inciting incident because the talk or the story that I just told you is about giving this talk. And so to me, the inciting incident is the invitation to give the talk. And Melissa and I were talking about this concept of a mentor. And in my case, I didn't really have a mentor for my story the way that maybe her story had a mentor. In other words, I did have a coach for giving the story, but I would say the real mentor was this reflection that I've been engaged in over the past several months about just exactly what is bike advocacy, why are we doing it, what is the higher purpose, and the story, the talk that I gave kind of rose up out of that period of reflection. For me, the climax of the story was actually the preparation because that was the hardest part of this experience. I had to get ready. I had to be able to meet the conditions of giving the talk. And I put the greatest amount of work into getting ready. I had to be able to tell the story in 8 minutes without notes and without sounding like a robot. And that to me was the climax of this effort of getting this talk together. And it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but the giving of the talk itself was kind of, for me, not the climax of the effort because I had just put so much work into getting ready to give the talk. The the falling action in this instance, for me anyway, was was actually giving the talk and the fact that it went fairly smoothly. I would say the other piece of the falling action was learning that I was the last person on the program, because that was the little surprise that I wasn't anticipating. The transformation piece for me were the 2 points that I realized that giving a talk and also understanding that being at the end of the program suggested that the organizers understood that telling stories, which is what I did, my opening line in this talk is something like, I'm here to tell you some stories about bicycling and community, was just so different from what the other speakers were doing, and that and so there was a big difference between the PowerPoint presentations that they were giving and the personal anecdotes that I was sharing, or the encounters or the stories that I was sharing. The other speakers on this program were terrific. There was a very popular progressive mayor of a neighboring city who is generally regarded as the smartest person in any room that he's in. And one of the other speakers I remember, I don't remember the third speaker, the third of the three other speakers, but the second guy was this very charismatic founder of a beloved nonprofit community farm, and he was just the darling of funders, and everybody loved what his work was, but they weren't telling stories the way I was telling stories. And I would say the resolution to my story that I just explained to you was that the experience made clear that all stories have a purpose, was really the resolution to me. And then, of course, it was what I learned by working with Melissa about the science behind storytelling. And I would say that in my case, my story doesn't so much have a solution tied to it. I'm not trying to solve a problem in this particular case, but it makes me mindful of the importance of thinking in those terms.
So I think that you make it whole through storytelling, that you realize that stories are a superpower, I think, for myself.
Okay.
Absolutely. And then I think the call to action for me is implicit in that you recognized, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen here. You recognized that storytelling is a superpower. And so I think the invitation is to all of us to take it more seriously as advocates, that we can use them to get things done. And so what I'd like to do now for another like 10 minutes, at the end, we're going to have Trini share with us some updates. But right now, while we've got this fresh in our mind, I want to know if anybody has any specific questions that we didn't answer. And also, does anybody have a sentence or two that as you were writing through this, you're like, oh, I'm really starting to get this, and I have something I want to share that I've written down. So Jim, have you looked at the comments? Do we have a question from anybody?
Let me see. I don't see any questions yet. I'm going to
Okay.
scroll back up.
So
No questions yet.
And so I will call on you to volunteer, Barbara, if you don't volunteer to tell. Because whenever you ask people, it's like deer in the headlights, not me, and then we end up going over with a great conversation. So I'm going to, Barbara, I've been, your face has been here watching, very engaged. So I want to call on you to unmute yourself and share maybe a sentence or two about what you've been writing. So we need you to unmute yourself. Can you see it there down at the bottom? There you go.
Thank you, Melissa. My question is, do you want a sentence that is part of what has occurred to me in listening? This has been wonderful, by the way. Or do you want a story that, a sentence that has occurred to me that it really has to be in my story to make it effective?
I want you to share whichever feels most poignant right now that you think would be most helpful for everybody else to learn from with what you've realized.
Well, I'm going to glance here. I do have to say I've been storytelling now for the last year and a half, and I've been affirmed by what you said today. but I've also learned a really lot about how to do that better. I think one of the things that was really helpful to me, and I'm just going to read this to you. This would be the bare bones of how I think I
Absolutely.
would start my story. It was kind of boring before. So I think I would start it with, let me tell you about our story. It was the last week of spring break, and we had just found out that here in our community, largely untouched so far by the pandemic, that we were going to not return to school and that many businesses were closing. What an uncertain time. My husband went on a long bike ride because that's how he processed things. And I spent some time in the garden planning where I would plant the new rose bushes because that's my way of processing. And as I was there, I began to wonder why he wasn't back yet from his bike ride. However, for almost 50 years, I'd been sending him out on bike rides with some worry, of course, but always a prayer that he would return safely. And he always had, except for this time.
Oh my goodness, Barbara. Wow. Thank you for that. You went ahead. I was only asking for a sentence or two, but you
I
landed it.
couldn't stop in there.
Well, and you can see that she was also starting to perform it. And next month, we're going to get into that. But she was also starting to do inflection and pacing because she's been studying this for a year and a half. So you can see how incredibly powerful that was, right? That like, boom, like, and you said, Barbara, before it was boring, and now you're like, the lights are starting to go on. How do I? And I knew as soon as I said a dark and stormy night, you were like, oh, okay, I got it. So what I want you guys to think about as you start thinking about your stories is that you can write down a sentence or two, and then you can write down a paragraph or two, and then you start reading it and see that that's a 5-minute story about that. It'll be a couple of pages probably. But then what I want you to do is go on a journey of the way that Barbara has, and you start studying stories. You could start reading your favorite journalist and how they write stories. You can look at the first, I mean, literally take out every kind of book that you love and read what how they start the story. You can zoom in on your favorite TV shows that you've recorded, and you can start their stories. And you can really see, what we want you to do is become a detective and start diagramming how stories are put together, and you will see that they follow this arc. And there's about 7 story types of all time around the world. That's it. There's only about 7 or 8 of them, and all of them map to a particular kind of arc. They'll be a little bit different. You can find your own. Again, we'll be sharing the advocate story map with you that we think really works for this. But by recognizing that these are puzzle pieces that you put together, you're going to put together better stories. And Jim, I think you had a thought that you wanted to share.
I just wanted to thank you for sharing that, Barbara. It was really gripping, so well done. I would encourage you to look up The Moth if you're not familiar with The Moth. It's a storytelling program. They have a terrific radio program that's broadcast over NPR, but they also have YouTube videos, and you can see, and I think actually on the Moth website they have videos of their programs, but you can see speakers delivering talks, but you can also listen to them with this idea of mapping out the arc, because those stories are very, very well structured. You know, to me, that's the apex of being able to deliver a story, is to do it as well as those speakers do. They have lots and lots of coaching to get to that level. So that's the end result of a lot of work, but that could also give you some pointers in how to pace yourself, how to deal with the delivery of something, modulating your voice. That was a big concern for me when I was, I had memorized this document, but I knew that I could end up sounding like a recording if I wasn't careful. And so what I was doing while I was walking around the neighborhood talking to myself was listening for that inflection to make sure that I was sounding as sort of natural as I could sound, because I want it to be conversational. I want a person to feel like they're hearing from a real person, as opposed to listening to a recording of a person reading something, if that makes sense.
So, Barbara, I think you have a beautiful voice. You have a beautiful storytelling voice. So you're already like way there. But what you've given me some ideas, and Jim has given me some ideas of the follow-up email that I send out in just an hour or so. I'm going to share with you Audacity, the link to Audacity, which is a free online recording program. And I'm going to share SoundCloud for all of you. And between those two, you can record and then share easily on your websites and email newsletters your story. And I'm going to share Jim's story on YouTube, and then I'm going to share my story, a story that I tell in about 5 minutes on there as well. And so now we're going to switch gears and catch up with Trini. Barbara, thank you. It was spectacular. And I hope you will come back and be a storyteller for us in April, because that would be so exciting.
Indeed,
And
I
then,
shall. Thank you.
yeah, and then Trini, we want to catch up with you about storytelling and what's going on in DC.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Barbara. And I snuck in an email for you. And I'm going to open the invitation to the people that can make it in a little bit. But just so you check your email, please. Because we need people like you. And this is like the whole purpose of this series of workshops with Melissa and Jim, because we need an army of storytellers. I have found through this process that's what makes really every argument more compelling. And we need people's voices. We need people to start to make people understand that these are not just numbers. I mean, we are people. Whether we've been impacted by a horrific crash that, just we survived, but yet we live with the consequences every single day, or we've lost someone that we love dearly. So it's so important. Every single day, I witness how these stories are changing the narrative across the country. I went to DC, like Melissa was mentioning. I went last week as part of the Bike Summit. So the Bike Summit is this incredible event that the League of American Bicyclists put together, and we get an opportunity to go and visit with our Congress members. So we get to tell them what we're feeling, how we've been impacted. It's usually paired up with an ask, and our 3 asks were pretty significant. I mean, the one that touched me the most was the Sarah Langenkamp Act, which is basically the giving back to the states the ability to get federal funding without having to match there's usually a 20% matching requirement that the local government has to invest in. And sometimes they just don't have the money to be able to do that. So that door gets shut. With this act, if it passes, that door is open. So it's 100% federal funding, which is huge. Yeah.
Wow.
So because of this event, we had over 200 people going to their different Congress people and asking for support for this. There's another one that was put in called the Bike Act, and that was introduced to the House, I think, the day we actually were advocating for it. And that one was to reallocate funding funding that already is there, but reallocating it for education. So to get into schools and create programs so little kids have access to cycling and proper cycling and at all levels. I say little kids, but it's just basically getting schools to have access to that money. And the other one has to do with infrastructure, and again, opening doors for local governments to have this be more accessible to them. So it was really successful. It was so invigorating and so exciting to see all these people really getting together and uniting forces. And most of them were cyclists because it was a bike summit, but there were some people that weren't, which was really interesting to me too. A lot of people in the industry, a lot of people just using stories all over the place.
But I bet you have a bit of
level,
an entertainment background, and we've kind of bonded on that. I bet you saw where you're like, oh, I wish they knew how to tell it in a shorter
more
amount of
condensed
time.
version.
I wish they knew how to be more emotionally engaging. I
Yeah.
wish, like, I wish instead of this one person telling a story for 10 minutes, we had 3 stories. Boom, 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 boom. Right? And that's, I can see your brain like going, thinking, who can I?
No, I know. And now there's another opportunity, and this is something really exciting that I want to share with you guys. So in not this last trip to DC, but the one prior to that one, I met this woman named Jennifer Smith, who actually made me realize that we had worked together for years and just had never met. And I had never really made the connection that it was her. It was really like an aha moment. And they were already starting the organization of this event for May 13th. It's May 13th through the 16th. And they called on Families for Safe Streets, the National Safety Council, and now we're part of this effort as well. And the idea is to bring a family from every state to have a lobby day at the Capitol again. And we will be lobbying for the Sarah Langenkamp Act again. And I know that they're trying to figure out what the best acts are gonna, or the best bills are gonna be, so we can go and speak on their behalf. But it's going to be a great event. It's survivor and family victims. We're sponsoring the event. So all these organizations are getting people out there. We don't want anybody to feel that they can't make it because of financial burdens. So we're providing flights and we're providing hotel stays. And again, it's May 13th through the 16th. And we're trying to get as many people involved as possible because, yes, our stories together are the most compelling. And that's, I think, from what Jennifer has shared, this was something that was born out of that aha moment. The idea that when we come together, that everybody is doing this work, and when you do it independently, well, yes, you will have an impact, but when you join forces, then things really, really happen. So yes, so if anybody can make it, just let me know. I'm gonna send it in my newsletter. I'm terrible at newsletters, but I will.
We'll work on that.
Yeah, and I am,
We'll
and I
send it.
did,
Yeah.
and I did send you an email, Barbara, just a few minutes ago, inviting you to that event, and hopefully you can make it, because yeah, like it's hard to find people. And that, again, this is why we're doing this program. So we can have our 1-minute elevator pitch, or 30-second elevator pitch, or we can have 3 minutes, which is what you get at, oh, I also didn't tell you guys. So I've been testifying a lot at a local level. So I've been to the Capitol about 4 or 5 times. I'm getting ready to go. They just canceled it as we were in this meeting. They postponed it a week, but I'm going to go again and to testify on behalf of the hands-free bill. It's now been introduced in the House. It passed unanimously in Senate. I don't know, there's a little bit of trepidation in the House. I'm not sure why, but yeah, so I'm getting emails from people all over the state saying that they're going to go and they're going to be testifying, whether it's virtually or in person, and it's very exciting. But you do have 3 minutes there. Last
Right.
time we had 2.
So I
And
want to, right. So I want to emphasize that. And so as we go into April and we're working on polishing it, something I want to throw out there for you and for Barbara and for others, whatever you're going to have storytelling, is that you have yourself and the person who's going to tell the story in 5 minutes or less, on audio and on video if possible, in a location in a way that works for you, so that you have it recorded. Because the other thing about stories is that when you tell them really well and they're really compelling, people want to hear them again. And
yeah,
and then they say, and then this is the good part. And any of you who have children know that you have to read the story to them again and again and again. So what I want to put into your strategy, Trini, and everybody that's going to be going on May 13th, is that those stories are captured in advance in ways that they can start circulating, right? And so like by the time, so that people are really, really well prepared, and that they have ignited the followers behind the stories, and that the members of the House or whoever you're meeting with, they can look at them again, and they can talk to their staff about it, and they can see that this is right. And so you see that we have all these marvelous technology now that we want to take advantage of, to not only have the stories at the testimony, but have a fuller version of the story where they can, at their own leisure, right?
and I want to tell you something. So as part of this, and it's all come together organically in a really beautiful way. So for last year, I've been talking to someone at the National Safety Council about creating these 5 videos that would be exactly what you're saying. So we're going to choose 5 families. These families are also, there's 3 steps. So it's sharing the story, also tying the story with like a success story in their local community, right? So in my case, my story will be shared if that's one of the ones that were chosen. But I say about mine because what they had to do was very simple, but they did it. And since they've changed the road, and since they've added signage, they added flashing yellow lights, they reduced the speed limit. Since those changes were made, there has not been a single incident. And this is coming from an intersection that was deemed as cursed when they interviewed me. So, so that's the second step. And then the third step, there's this map that has been started by Families for Safe Streets, and that all these different organizations are collaborating with. And our ask is going to be for people to put their story in that map. So add that
Right.
story
Cool.
and have that resource that we can use for multiple things as it grows and as it's needed. So it's come all the way around. So we're going to be filming people at the event. And we're gonna have people there with cameras. We're gonna have people. It's gonna be well documented, but that's a fabulous idea. So we can use that as like a follow-up email with the
And we
stories
can
that were
encourage,
shared. Mhm.
I guarantee you, they're not thinking of telling anybody how to tell a story. They're just going to put the camera on them. And so we come in with hey, this is
Yeah.
how you tell a story. And all of those stories, like Barbara, we can get testimonial from you about studying storytelling for a year and a half, that what you're learning, right? Like that, everything that I've taught is not anything I came up with. This is ancient art that Joseph Campbell studied and others have studied. You can do research online. You can find all of this information out. But I just started learning about a decade ago that I was going to the bike summits, Tarini, and I was like, wow, we're not very good presenters. Like we're not like we're really wonky. And I included myself, and I realized, well, how do you do this? Like how do you tell a compelling story? So Jim, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you everybody for being with us. It was absolutely delightful. You will get an email from me this afternoon with those resources that I shared. And Trini, we're gonna talk if you want to stay for a minute and catch me up on a couple other things. And everybody, thank you so much. And oh, one final thing. If you want to be involved in ongoing storytelling more actively, you're on our email newsletter list, but if you want to share your email here and just let people know that you would be open to partnering and buddying with people and Zoom calls and ways that you get together to sort of help each other. The way Jim was marching around with his headphones, you might become a storytelling buddy for somebody. So if you want to do that, please go ahead and leave your information here. And until next time, thank you everybody for being with us.
Thank you.